Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Governance Committee meeting of February 3rd, 2024. I would like to acknowledge that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subbasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Palcochin, Dididat, and Pachidat nations, whose people have gently walked here for thousands of years. I would like to welcome Alternate Director Lochner, her first meeting here with us, for Allison Nicholson. Thank you for coming. And also just a note to everyone, I prefer to be referred to as Chair, not Madam Chair, but Chair. Mr. Robbins.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, everybody. My name is Patrick Robbins. I'm the Corporate Officer. Just to get you going with your committee meeting, first item of business is to motion to approve the agenda. I'm not aware of any additions.
Moved. Second, do I have a seconder? Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And a recommendation that the minutes of the Governance Committee meeting of February 7th, 2024 be adopted.
So is Director Justice online? I don't see him. So I noted, oh, there you are.
Yes.
Would you like to say anything, Director Justice? Okay, I mean, when I reviewed the minutes, I saw that Director Justice is noted as being opposed to one of the motions, but in rewatching, he's clarified that he was not opposed. So just a simple note.
And Chair, I'm assuming that is from the minutes under item R2.
Yeah, the first round of motions.
Director Justice, is that correct?
So he's listed as being opposed
Correct.
on there, so
I don't know whether it's correct or not. The chair identified this to me and said she would correct it, so I just
Okay.
assumed it was.
We will correct the minutes to reflect that you were not opposed by looking at the automatic replay.
Great. So minutes as amended? Is that
Minutes
right?
as amended. Yes, please.
I had a mover and a seconder? Just show of who that was again, just to make sure I'm following procedure. Move seconded, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
That was the business arising for the minutes. We move to public input period. The purpose of the public input period is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee. Before the committee considers the item, the public input period procedure policy provides for the public input period to proceed in a timely fashion. Public input period items cannot include matters which are or have been the subject of a public hearing. We don't have anybody online, but there are some people in the boardroom that may wish to participate.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair. It's going to be hard to retrain an old person like me. Thank you and welcome, Director Lochner. My name is Susan Kaufman and I live in Satlam in Area E. I welcomed the report and I did send a letter out to all of the directors and I won't go over that. But I would like to say I did review the my notes from that meeting, and I was very surprised to see that the recommendation coming forward was only to have public input at committee of the whole and only question period at the end of the board meeting per month. So that was surprising, but it would also, at the February 7th meeting, the board members were not given information till the day of the meeting. And at this meeting, you received a set of recommendations, but the parameters on which those recommendations were based on was not included in the public record. I don't know if you received it or not. As a member of the public, I really value my input and my ability to come and speak to each and every one of you when the need arises, and to ask those questions that I feel are pertinent. So I would really hope that the board maintains public input and question period at all of the CVRD meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. We highly value your input and the time you took for your thoughtfully worded email. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair. Isquail Siemnasiea. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. It is a privilege to be here in person, to connect in a timely way. My input is to, yes, please, can we keep public input and question period policies as is without any changes? I would like to refer to the correspondence that I sent as well to Legislative Services. I believe it's being circulated to the board as we speak. But it's from the Government of Canada website, and it represents best practices and guidelines for public engagement. And it's to create accessibility and to foster that two-way communication that is so, so important, so that you hear in a timely way from the residents of the region on issues that matter to them. And sometimes the best way we can communicate is here in person and respond as well at the end of a session. I'd also like to speak, so that was R1. I'd also like to speak to R2. It is inspiring to read the ideals, the high standards that are set for each and every one of you. I believe that if they were followed to the letter, we would have such a smooth and robust feeling of trust and understanding between all the levels of society here. But unfortunately, it's not consistent, and there is not a fair and equal access and communication from area to area and region to region. And so I would just want to say, is there a point in the discussion today when we can talk about how to follow up when things break, when things are broken, when communication isn't where it should be? And I would like to, again, call out the highest practice, which is we want to be collaborative. We want to work with the grassroots people, boots on the ground within each and every community. And we want citizen engagement and public engagement. We want to hear from all the views. And I hope, yeah, I'm not seeing my time on the clock, but I think I need to wrap up and just say that I'm hopeful that this group can arrive at a good decision today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Chair. We'll move right on to the reports. R1 is a report from Manager Legislative Services Division with regards to updates to public input and question period policies and the committee terms of reference. There is a four-part recommendation, but if I might suggest that we go over the terms of reference, the two policies, and then the committee can consider the recommendation after a bit of a discussion on those items. Does
Yeah,
that make
so
sense?
if we can look at number 1, the first recommendation. Any discussion on number 1, that the updated governance committee terms of reference be adopted? Director Deck.
Sorry, I'm trying to load that on my computer and I can't find it. So I'll just have to wait because I don't have, yeah. Site can't be reached.
Likewise, many of our videos are not.
It says no internet. So,
I don't know if we're on the screen now. Pause for 5 minutes.
thank you.
Sounds like we need a 5-minute break.
I just need a copy of that. Yes, you can help me.
Welcome back. Thank you for your patience. Sorry about that. So I have Director Deck, Director Douglas, and Director Stone, you had your hand up, but it's no longer up. Would you like it up? Like to be on the list? No?
No,
Okay.
I'll wait and listen for a bit.
Okay, great. Director Deck.
So just to be clear, we're R1, are we?
R1, number 1,
Number 1.
terms of reference.
Okay, when I looked at all the information given to us, I have to view it through the lens of the overarching idea of, are we encouraging and enabling public engagement, or are we limiting or chilling it? And I believe that some of the items that are recommended do just that. They chill or reduce the amount of input that people can have.
So, Director Deck, just, I appreciate and want to hear those comments, but I just wonder if they would be better under number 2 and number 3, like when we talk about the actual policies. This is just the terms of reference for the governance committee moving forward.
Oh, okay, I'll wait.
Okay. Director Douglas. We can't hear you if you're talking. You're muted.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I've lost the unmute bar on here. I don't know what's going on. All right. Yeah, so Chair, I'm going to just start off by saying I appreciate all the work that went into developing the terms of reference and all the work that's been done by the committee to date. However, in my view, when I look at the work ahead of us with this committee, I don't believe it should be a standing committee. My preference would be to see this rolled into the committee of the whole. I know in the materials it does mention having this committee do some work on, for example, delegations or municipal director remuneration. To me, it isn't sufficient enough work to have this as a standalone committee, and I again would suggest that we combine this with the committee of the whole. If that's not the direction the committee wants to go in, then I would suggest that we identify a limited number of directors to participate on this. The fact that we have all of the directors sitting on this committee, again, to me, makes this appear to be more suitable for work done by the committee of the whole. And I guess the other point is, I know with scheduling is going to be a challenge for everybody, and obviously can't speak for the rest of the committee, but I know on my end, typically I have set aside the Wednesdays where we don't have CBRD meetings for many of my community meetings, and this has been a challenge, having an additional CBRD meeting on a day when, at least for North Cowichan, many of us are either meeting with folks in our community or getting ready for our regular council meetings that are held on the first and third Wednesday of the month. So I've got additional comments about public input and question period, but again, with the terms of reference, I wouldn't support making this a standing committee this time.
Thank you for that. So this was discussed at length in the last meeting, but I don't believe you were here, were you?
No, unfortunately, I missed the last meeting.
So do you want to make a motion and test the House on this? So we spoke a lot about it, and I know that the scheduling is hard to, meet everyone's needs, particularly the munis. And I stated in the last meeting how grateful I was for the flexibility that was shown, because we were able to have such a great conversation all around governance, which is what we're here to do, which I really appreciated. But I honor the will of the committee. So if you would like to make a motion, and go for it.
Sure, and I might after we debate this, I might just log out and log back in because I cannot find the bar here for lowering my hand or meeting around meeting. But yeah, sure, Chair, I'll move that the committee. I'll look to Mr. Robbins maybe for some assistance here, but that the committee not adopt the terms of reference for the governance committee and instead direct staff to include the committee's work as part of the committee of the whole.
Is there a seconder for that? It's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. And this is probably through to staff. I'm trying to understand the implications of this idea or motion. And does it change staff's work that they have to do in terms of preparing? Does it actually ease the load or add to it or make no change at all?
Ms. Miles Wilson, approaching the podium. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Every committee that we add, of course, creates a workload, as Mr. Robbins and his team will attest to. But the one thing I did want to reflect on is just that we are, as staff, trying to manage the agendas for Committee of the Whole and Board more carefully because we have had a lot of business pile up and had some pretty long meetings. It's tough on everybody, staff and directors and the public too, to review all of this stuff. And so if we are including that on Committee of the Whole days, that does change things. It's not without impact. And so we would have either to bring you in earlier or potentially have less business that we're going through, which will then kind of flow business over to the next meeting because we would be doing them once a month as per the current plan. So it's not without impact. I totally respect that we have scheduling challenges just across the board, but we will have to adjust, and it may impact the flow of work.
Thank you. So I have Director Stone, Morrison, and then McGonigal. Go ahead, Director Stone.
Thank you. Yeah, I raised the scheduling issue, before and didn't get any traction there, but recognizing that although it might not be appreciated, in particular in North Cowichan's case, they do have their council meetings on these days. And I've watched a few and looked at a few of their agendas, and they are pretty lengthy at times as well. So I think in understanding workload, we have to understand that for municipal directors, there's a large workload there too, right? So I recognize that for electoral area directors, ESC is a heavy workload. But with Committee of the Whole and council meetings as well for the municipal directors, it's really difficult to schedule those extra Wednesdays. I brought this up before. I still think the governance committee needs to be a standalone, but I'm just not sure how well it works to have every Wednesday blocked out when you also have Committee of the Whole and council meetings at the municipalities as well. So anyway, I share Director Douglas's concern about the scheduling. I'm not sure about combining it with Committee of the Whole. I get the logic, but I do like the separate subject. Perhaps maybe this is a conversation more about how we used to break up Committee of the Whole essentially to thematic pieces where there was the Community Services Committee, the Regional Services Committee, the board, and those committee meetings essentially that have become Committee of the Whole alternated Wednesdays to sort of provide focus. We went away from that because we felt that it made some of those decisions around things like transit or community parks or regional parks sort of not as timely. But I think we have to figure out a way forward that is inclusive of everybody at the table. And I'm not sure this scheduling right now It doesn't work for me, and I've heard from North Cowichan as well that it doesn't work for them. I'm not sure I support this motion, but I do have concerns around the scheduling of this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, don't want to be comparing the business of local government to sausage making, but it kind of is. And, you know, our board chair has just indicated that there has been different approaches to doing the business of our communities, and we have had, you know, separate committees, transit, regional services, and the likes, and wasn't particularly enthusiastic about everything being rolled into committee of the whole. And the topics that we're here to discuss today are a perfect example of what shouldn't be rolled into a committee of the whole, at least in my view. There's enough here that, while we're having scheduling challenges, I think that this material is important to be dealt with separately, and I'm a little concerned that we're going to a sort of a standard committee of the whole board structure that's very akin to municipal government, and we're not municipal government. We're a regional district local government, and for the purposes of what we've got here, I'm supportive of the general information of what we've got before us, the terms of reference. Scheduling is another issue. It's not really the question of whether or not this should be a standing committee. I think this should be a standing committee. If we have to figure out scheduling, then let's figure out scheduling. I think there's more than enough material here for this group to stand on its own as a standing committee, and won't be supporting the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Chair, who happens to be a madam. I did get around that, didn't I? Thank you. I too am a little concerned about some of the lengthy committee of the whole and board meetings, and by adding the governance portion within those formats could be problematic lengthwise. I personally don't have a problem with the Wednesday allocation. If it's a matter of looking at representation, whether 16 members should be on the governance committee, that is another point for discussion. Whether there could be a municipal director on that governance committee representing the municipal portion, which I would be happy to do if that is the case. And looking at a transformative group to work on the governance issues, to bring it back to the committee and the board for consideration of those recommendations, may be another alternative to mitigate some of the scheduling problems within the municipalities. I know that the workload has increased exponentially within the municipal portion of directors from the first term that I was elected to. We have been adding various portions within our own municipal governance, which piggybacks into the regional portions. So if I will not support the motion as stated, but if we can look at an alternative setup for this committee, I would suggest that a municipal representative be appointed for those discussions.
Thank you. I have Director Justice and then Director Abbott.
Thank you. I guess I got a bit of a question, I suppose, which is how often do we anticipate actually meeting as a governance committee? I mean, it seems to me from the what I've read in the terms of reference, there is only a couple of relatively small issues to discuss after this one. I mean, delegations and muni director remuneration. So maybe it's not that much of a problem because we're not going to be meeting very often. If I'm wrong and there's other things that are coming down the pike, please let me know. And what I'd really like to know is how how often, or how many times do we actually intend to meet as a committee? But I will say that whether this is rolled into the committee of the whole or not, for me the big issue is scheduling. It's very problematic for me on the Wednesday mornings for various reasons. Not the least of which is that some occasionally we get the 600-700 page agendas, and if you don't study all weekend, you basically have a couple of days to get through it all. And Wednesday morning is often for me a time where I'm fully focused on the coming agenda for the council meetings.
Thank you. The terms of reference say monthly or as called by the chair. That said, that's also dependent on staff capacity. So we didn't have a meeting last month, but here we are this month. And there were alternatives to scheduling proposed, a while back. So I think scheduling absolutely can be negotiated and looked at, but that's separate from the terms of reference. I'll go to Director Abbott and then Stone.
Thanks, Chair. I concede that I seconded this motion to get it on to the discussion table. It perhaps might be chalked up to technological challenges for Director Douglas, but the wording was not, of the motion is a bit confusing. But generally, I am moved by the notion of very busy municipal directors, busy agendas, and I think this governance committee was a select committee at one point, and then it became a committee of the entire standing committee. I would prefer to see seasoned directors participating, and in the spirit of what Director McGonigal suggested, bringing at least one municipal voice to the table, and meet as regularly as need be to bring back sound governance issues. It seems like a training ground for newer directors to get involved and learn more about what goes on around the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stone.
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually moved by not moved to emotionally, but moved with the compelling arguments of Director McGonigal. And everybody's schedules are different, and I know that our evening council meetings, which start at 7 o'clock, can run late into the evening, and then it's a turnaround for this meeting in the morning. Typically, I do like to review agendas directly prior to meetings, and it makes it difficult, just the scheduling of this meeting right after a late night council meeting, just to provide the focus and refresh on all of the content of the agendas. I'll read them in advance like most of us do, but as I found sometimes if I read all the different agendas for all the different committees and roles we serve on a Monday, and we have 3 or 4 meetings a week, I might forget the details by the time we get to the actual meeting. So I wonder maybe if the majority of directors are comfortable with the scheduling, then maybe we look at the committee composition. I have great comfort in a smaller group of directors bringing forward the recommendations to either committee of the whole or the board, sort of for final shaping before adoption. I know that when we had this conversation about composition before, it to me was based on seemingly a desire for all board members to participate in the discussions, but I have comfort in not participating in this committee and following along. Although I would probably end up watching them anyway. I feel like we're kind of workshopping it on the fly. And when I looked at this agenda, I thought, well, that's what we're in for. So, as far as the terms of reference goes, and the things that have been cited as far as business of this committee, I think there's a little bit more roles and responsibilities, and then of all members, not just the chairs and directors, but also the roles and responsibilities of vice chair and committee chairs, and then reflecting on the workload that Director McGonigal also mentioned, both municipally and at the regional district level. The time commitment is way, 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 way higher than I ever remember it being. The amount of correspondence, there just isn't enough time in the day to prepare for this many and this long of meetings and then keep up with the other workload. In public input, we heard of, setting this example. But I think people need to understand that the workload and the expectations of one citizen are the same expectations that seemingly hundreds of citizens or more may have on an ongoing basis. So when we look at roles and responsibilities, which is to come, the sharing of the workload is going to be a requirement going forward, and then we need to respect and remunerate that, in my mind, to compensate people for the additional time they need to spend on this work. But perhaps maybe it's the committee composition that is the way to go, and Director McGonigal's suggestion was thoughtful and something I could see myself aligning with. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Douglas, I see you for round two.
Yeah, just really quickly, I do agree with Director Stone and McGonigal's comments about the composition. Could be a good way to address some of the challenges some of us are facing in terms of scheduling. The one part I'm not 100% clear on is the work of the committee going forward. And because Councillor Justice mentioned in the materials, there is a reference to reviewing our policy around delegations, and then also the remuneration for the municipal directors. But we've already dealt with the code of conduct. By the end today, hopefully, we'll be done with public input and question period. So I'm not 100% clear on how much work this committee is going to have going forward, and if it is limited to those two items over the course of the year. I wonder, Chair, if you have any thoughts on how many meetings that would require. Because if the committee is going to be meeting twice a year, then to me the scheduling is less of an issue. I think we could probably all make time if it's going to only be meeting every 6 months. But if it is every month, and if there are many other items to be added to the committee's work plan, that obviously changes the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a long list of items that fall within those four categories of work for the governance committee. That said, if we get it all done in 4 months, then we can end the standing committee, right? The intention is just to set up a committee that is dedicated to working out our governance structure and bringing clear, transparent governance into our board. Director Stone, I see your hand. Do you want to talk again, or is it just your hand? No, it's just your hand. So, yeah, I feel that there is a lot of really good, juicy work that we get to dive into in this committee, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to chair, right? This is my first term. I feel like I'm on this incredible roller coaster of learning, and part of the work I think that we heard so much in the chair elections this year was that we wanted to be more collaborative. We wanted to work together more. We want to provide more opportunity for all directors to get the experience with chairing, etc. So I hear the composition part, and in reviewing the terms of reference, there's basically point 3.0 composition that could just be removed, and we let it stand that the chair appoints the committee, just like he appoints all the committees annually. But we have a motion on the floor that we need to deal with first, right? And, Director Wilson. Sorry. Yeah, I do have Director Morrison on my list. I just forgot. And then Director Wilson.
So I'm getting a little frustrated and probably shouldn't be speaking when I'm frustrated, but this is all coming back to me. We've probably now been a couple of hours discussing something that I thought we had resolution on. When we asked for volunteers and talked about this, and we've been talking about this for way too long, we had, I think, all of the electoral area directors and Chair Stone. And I'm pretty sure what we came to was committee of all directors, and there would be scheduling challenges. But a committee of all directors, and if you couldn't make it, you couldn't make it. If you had an alternate, you sent your alternate. But we could make decisions that would ultimately be recommended to the board. So I think that that was the best we could settle on, and it made sense. And if a director can't necessarily come to a meeting, then they can't come. So, let's deal with this, move on. I think the chair's right. There's lots of juicy stuff to dig into here. And it's frustrating having to go round and round and round on something that I thought we'd more or less come to a mostly an agreement on. Show up if you can, if you can't, but at least we'd have a working number. And as long as we didn't run into quorum issues, we'd be good.
Thank you for that, Director Morrison. Director Wilson.
Couple of words there, frustration. Yeah, I completely agree with that one. But basically, the other phrase that I like is what he said. Basically, we've talked about this over and over again, and I'll stop there. But I'm sure that Mr. Robbins is going to read the motion that's on the floor at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have Director Istash, hopefully to close. I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, that little hand is so hard to see. Istash and then Justin.
I'll be quick like Director Wilson did because Director Morrison went before prior. Both of us, I echo what he says. So I think you can make it. You can make it. If you don't, you don't. That way we get a good municipal representation here. I just look at the amount of people. We're missing, I believe, 3 today, are we? Or a few, and we've got a good cross-reference people, and if you can make it, it'd be great, and then it still has to go to committee of the whole. So I think we've got a good balance with the terms of reference as they are, and yourself, Chair, said the same. So I won't be supporting the motion, to the dismay possibly to my other municipal directors, but I just think this way we get a good cross-reference. So it doesn't need to be said in the terms of reference based on quorum, though. It doesn't need to say not all, like it says it's comprised of her, but we don't need to say anything specifically, like should at least have this many directors in attendance to ensure, or anything like that. I think it's okay the way it is, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll echo my frustration that we had this conversation at length in the last meeting, minus one director. Director Justice, do you have anything new to add, or are you okay with calling the question?
Just a request. I'd really like to, if you could share your list of future work of the committee with the committee, that would be great. Thanks.
Yes, I absolutely will do that. It's a very messy list right now. I wanted to categorize it to match up with the 4 categories in our terms of reference once they were adopted, if they get adopted. So, thank you for a hearty hour-long conversation. Do we need to have the motion reread? Yes.
Chair, we can have it reread. I'll have staff read it for you aloud.
That the Governance Committee not adopt the terms of reference for the Governance Committee and instead direct staff to include the committee's work as part of the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Director Douglas, I notice your hand.
Yeah, just quickly, Madam Chair, I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect here. On the one hand, we're being told participation on this committee, make it if you can. But on the one hand, I've heard several directors express frustration that we're even discussing this when it was already discussed at the previous meetings. There's a bit of a disconnect there. Like if on the one hand, you're going to say, you're going to tell each other show up when you can, but then at the same time, we're going to criticize each other for debating items that were discussed in the previous meeting. To me, it just seems a bit odd, but I know we've discussed this for the last hour, so perhaps it is time to call the question.
I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? We have Justice, Acton, Douglas. All those opposed? Motion fails. Do I have a mover for, to adopt the terms of reference, number one, as presented? Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Director Wilson and then Martman. And Douglas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, excuse me. I'm looking at section 1.4, board remuneration and compensation, focusing on policy, making annual general wage adjustment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that we, in particular, the EA directors, had agreed that we would be subject to the annual cost of living or tied into what staff compensation is. Is that correct, or am I looking at the wrong things here?
Does staff have anything?
Chair, I'd have to be looking back at my memory, and I believe that was the case, that there was an interim measure, but there was other work that had been suggested on setting and reviewing and a methodology for doing that, other than simply taking your current remuneration and indexing it to CPI.
Follow up, please, Madam Chair. If that's the case, then I have a real problem with that. I don't see, given that we've already awarded ourselves quite a significant rise in the last year, that we should be then looking at something which is going to give us more than the cost of living allowances. And if that's something we're going to be discussing as we go forward, then basically, fair notice, I cannot, in all conscience, agree with anything that departs from that kind of policy. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear you, Director Wilson, and I don't know that that's the intention. Ms. Miles-Wilston.
Yeah, no, I just want to recognize the comment, Director Wilson, and we don't have a methodology as mentioned. There are best practices out there. We will be considering that. It is in the terms of reference. We need to kind of put this one to bed, so to speak, and come up with something that we can roll into a regular review cycle that everyone's comfortable with. So we don't quite have that routine established, and I think it's fair to everyone that we do the hard work and get something that everyone's comfortable with for the long term.
Thank you. And last one, if I may. The other one in there, conducting wage reviews and assessing current municipal director compensation. I'm not sure that would be part of it, or explain to me how this goes on, because as far as I know, the municipal directors are awarded a certain amount for sitting on the board of directors. But that was something that we would be discussing as a raise to them. From which funding would that come from?
I think the point is just to have a policy to govern that kind of process. So correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Robbins.
Yeah, there's no presupposing in terms of the outcome other than establishing so that it's clear, it's consistent and transparent, and you can rely on that until such time as you need to review your policy. And it could simply be, and I'm not suggesting that, but it could simply just be indexing to CPI.
Okay, that makes it clear. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have Director Martman, and then Douglas, and then Stone.
Thank you, Chair, and actually it's on the same topic, because I'm wondering if it's too wordy and if we shouldn't consider just board remuneration and compensation. And the reason I would mention this is because I believe we do a disservice to our vice chairs in the way that we do not remunerate them for the work they're doing. And so I think as well, I would like to see the ability to put things into policy that would be recognizing that, or perhaps recognizing that work. The other piece that I would like to see is that we also find a way that we take away the apparent voting on our own remuneration, and that we can move that into somehow have a methodology, maybe they follow the UBCM proposal that, any wage increase would fall in the next, after the elections. And so those kind of things to me may be a bit broader than what's written after board remuneration compensation. So that's why I was suggesting, and if there's interested in some discussion on it, or I can make an amendment.
I believe the intention of the terms of reference was to include those topics you mentioned within these categories. Mr. Robbins, can you?
While they're not explicitly indicated there, the policy can, or any policy work you do can give those considerations. It was explicitly included in your terms of reference because this was the focus of previous board discussion, to give you focus. And quite frankly, it's a bit of a holdover from when you were a select committee, and the select committee specifically wanted to go in this direction. And so I don't necessarily see any harm in broader language, but this was brought forward just based upon your previous discussion and your desire to look specifically at those particular areas.
Director Douglas, your hand's not up, but do you still want to talk?
No, my hand was, I left it up
Sorry,
from the previous
okay.
question by accident.
Director Stone.
Yeah, I don't want to discuss items that are to be discussed in the future, just referred to in the terms of reference, but Mr. Robbins, I think, said it best. This is about establishing policies for these items. We're not establishing the policies right now, and by putting down that we're going to have those policy discussions doesn't presuppose any outcome. Just for reference, the municipal director remuneration hasn't been adjusted for, I think, 12 or 14 years. And I think we can all agree that there's a tremendously higher workload than there was. I can speak to it from my 10 years on the board, that it's a very different prospect than in the past. This is just about what we will establish policy for. So that would be the discussion that we have in the future around remuneration and roles and responsibilities, is developing a policy so that you have something to lean on. And the UBCM policy was referred to, and actually when we created a policy municipally, that was actually referenced in the UBCM policy development about how to review remuneration of elected officials when that policy paper was put out. So I'm a big supporter of the UBCM policy. It would just be creating a policy for the CVRD on how you review remuneration and make those adjustments, right? To the conversation around roles and responsibilities, I did note a big gap in vice chair information in the package, but that's an upcoming discussion, so I'll save it for there. But as far as the terms of reference goes, again, I think it's more about how we time the meetings and the composition of the committee. Otherwise, I think generally I'm pretty supportive of what's being recommended here. Thanks.
Thank you. So I don't have anyone left on my speakers list. Are there any amendments anyone would like to make? Okay, then I will call the question. All those in, do we need to reread the motion? Yes?
The motion is that the updated governance committee terms of reference be adopted.
All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, we have Abbott, Stone, Douglas. Motion carries. We are going to take a break. Thank you for all of your in-depth discussion. So let's take 10 minutes. Back at, what time is it now? 10:43, 10:45? We are live. Welcome back. Okay, moving on. I'm going to pass it to Mr. Robbins to give us a little background on public input period policy and question period and the research he's done towards this report.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. Yeah, I just wanted to help you with this discussion, just to give you a little background and some context as to the amendments that we made to the public input period policy and the question period. First and foremost, it was our assumption that these policies were wanted to be continued, and that was the desire of the committee and the board in advancing this and for you to have a look at them. We're a bit of an outlier when it comes to regional districts in terms of public input period and question period. I didn't embed this specifically into my report, given the desire that you wanted to see these brought forward, but I can tell you that generally speaking, regional districts in British Columbia don't use these two avenues of engagement where they funnel, my words, if you will, input from the public through the delegation function. And so the regional districts here on the island and several that I researched in the Lower Mainland and in the interior use delegations, whereas municipalities, on the other hand, have very similar policies when it comes to public input and question period. And I suspect, and we're just looking at the dates when these were adopted, I suspect that when these were developed for the board at the time in 2011, and what was the other one? 2019, I suspect that staff were looking at examples that came from municipalities, which there's lots out there, and it's easy to do that research. And so the pieces that you see here are, generally speaking, modeled after municipalities. We can surmise in terms of the regional districts as well, and make as to why they funnel things through delegations. There is nothing within their policy framework or within their procedure bylaws that would otherwise limit the types of things that are brought forward to their boards through delegations. Keeping in mind, as you called them, guardrails, if you will, or a little box around it, they do limit, in instances in regional districts, they limit the time somebody could be a delegation and the number of. And I think that reflects the type of business and the volume of business and the different type of business that regional districts do over municipalities. So that's a bit of the context. The other part of taking your feedback and doing some further research and embedding that into some updated, these policies are about balance, pure and simple. And it's a balance of providing opportunity for the public to engage with you. And I think that that's another piece that we often miss, as the chair was talking about, when the public goes to our website, for instance, and is inundated with so much, we may not understand the full breadth of all the ways with which the public provides you input or participates with you. And so that was part of the balance, as well as there is other opportunities with which the public to engage. Some of them include statutory obligations as well. And you will probably remember over the course of the last year, some of the question period or public input period where there's a bit of a gray area where the discussion perhaps went to an area that either had a statutory component, and you run the risk, and I think it's a good term, you run the risk of discussing items that are outside of a question period or public input period. The policies speak to some of those. Of course, the biggest one that we hear about and we often refer to in our statement is about public hearings. But there are other opportunities where we directly engage with the public and they provide you input. I'm just going to use an example because it'll be on your agenda next week, is with regards to the South Cowichan Issues Assessment. And there's a large component of engagement to understand the issues that are in South Cowichan. And the only way you're going to find out what those issues are is if you need to engage the public. And so part of that process will be engaging the public. To the extent that you need people to come when you're talking about South Cowichan issues to provide you input and question period, I suppose, yes, that's another avenue. But my point being is that you have other means with which to have the public engage with you. The other part is, and I sort of allude to it, is when I said balance, it's a balance for the board to be efficient and effective with your business. And so you see that play out often, and probably more so when you are dealing with a little more contentious items. When it comes in your efficiency and effectiveness of working as the board, you spoke to it even today about being effective and efficient. And one of the directors asked about moving it to committee of the whole, and that just shifts the burden to there, and being effective and efficient, then you lose that as well. The other thing, and perhaps I want to be careful with my words, when I speak about balance, it's the balancing of the needs of others and varying opinions, recognizing that question period and public input period are not the forums generally for you to debate with the public. And you've seen that recently as well, where you are engaging, or there is this sense of sometimes that those that disagree with you need to debate with you and convince you that you're wrong. My words, and I apologize if I'm using pretty strong language, but that's part of the balance as well. I talked about managing the risks, but that's generally sort of the context. And again, we're sort of the outliers. We had just sort of a brief conversation about delegations. That's part of your terms of reference. And so when you're looking at question period and public input period, I'm not suggesting you eliminate those and look at the practice and the model used in other regional districts, which is to funnel through delegations. You can have this interim step. And when you get to that, at this table talking about delegations, you may want to look at or instruct staff to look at how delegations work. The other part about using delegations, and I'll just touch on it, and, I said you're going to save that for another day, but it provides you specific input that you can then be able to respond in a better way. As opposed to, we want to provide answers, we want to provide feedback to the questions, the input you get, and we often, my words again, we speak off the cuff. We may not be as readily prepared, and we want to be responsive. This way, that's one of the reasons why you would look at that. Anyways, I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that background. I'll open it up for questions, clarifications. Director Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you,
Chair.
Patrick.
It's chair.
Madam Chair. What did I say?
You said madam, it's chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Patrick. That was really a lot of clarification there. Can I ask a question about what you said about funneling through delegations? And the reason I'm asking that is that it adds another step, because there is a form to be filled out. There is a time period where that's considered whether it will be allowed or not. But my worry is that public input period normally comes as a result of the agendas being read on the Friday before, where people say, okay, this is coming up, I need to talk about it. The fact that they may have to wait, make an application, all the rest of it, adds another delay to it, which I'm not really too happy with. So how would this funneling through delegations work?
So looking at Chair, if I may, looking at the practices by half a dozen regional districts, we assemble the agenda and we ask materials be provided literally the week before so that we can review it with the chairs, publish it, get it out to the public. Recognizing that there are some policies that suggest 24 hours and 48 hours. We would have to have that discussion, and you could charge staff with doing that research, whether that provides us sufficient time to accommodate and line up delegations, if it is indeed that short of a period with which somebody can apply. That addresses then that the members of the public then can see the agenda in advance, generally several days, And then if there is a box around delegations, if that's the directions you want to go, I don't want to presuppose that, then you may put on the opportunities that they can be submitted up to a shorter period of time so that the public does actually have an idea of what's on the agenda, and a delegation can speak to those agenda items.
And follow up, please, Chair. Yeah, that's good. I'm not sure that I could actually support something like that, but that's going to come forward in the thingies there. As far as the public input period, the question periods, I honestly feel they should remain as they are. And the reason being is that we should seek public input, or we should not seek to limit that public input or even dismiss the views of the public. And it seems that if we stop this or stop that, we're trying almost to stop that. Maybe that's not the intention at all, but it might be the appearance that we are. And there's a mention too also of repetition. It's going to occur, no two ways about it, but there are certain points which need to be repeated to make emphasis on something which has come up. And it's something that we can talk about later on, but I'm a little bit, and this goes, I think, towards what Patrick has said about entering into debate with people who are there, saying you're repeating what you're saying, etc. Yeah, so we've got to be a little bit careful. I've got a couple of more points that I'd like to bring up, but I'll relinquish for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I want to recognize that Director Deck had some things she wanted to say earlier in the meeting. Are you prepared to go now, or we've also got Director Morrison on the list? Okay, Director Morrison, and I've got Stone as well.
Thank you, Chair. In reading the material, it's a little more than what I thought we'd be getting. I guess over time, we've developed our public input and question period sort of on our own. And this board and previous boards hasn't really been concerned about what other local governments have been doing, especially regional districts. I can say that both public input and question period have been, I would say, extremely successful. They've been good opportunities for public to engage. There have been the odd occasion where the odd director has thought that maybe, getting a bunch of people to come and speak their minds and to support a position was a good idea. We've had people who have been offside in regards to their remarks towards staff and to elected officials around the table. But those have been pretty rare instances, and I think that I don't want to see any reduction in the community's ability to be able to come and speak their mind to us. Yes, we get people that will send in letters and emails and come and speak to us and repeat verbatim what they provided to us in advance. I think we have to grin and bear it and listen. We get into trouble when we start, I think, engaging, and I think Mr. Robbins has spoken to debating what has been presented from the public in a really unvarnished fashion. It's supposed to be input for all of us to consider individually, and I think if we do that, we're okay. So I can see a little bit of tweaking. I can see us having remarks along the lines of this is the place that we as a group, as elected officials, do our business, and that we invite input, but we don't engage with that input when we conduct the business. So I think I want to see this continue in electoral area services, in committee of the whole, and at the board, even though it takes up time, and maybe we can talk about delegations separately. I don't think that they're necessarily the same thing. I've always viewed delegations as being more the purview of groups that want to provide us with information on policy and maybe the odd specific file. So I'll stop there. I don't want to see a bunch of changes, but a little bit of tweaking around the edges, I think, would help us to have better policies. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Stone, Acton, and Istash. And then Director Stone, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So actually, just rereading it again and again, I think the policy that's presented here actually has quite a bit of merit, and I'll try and just kind of be as concise as I can. The applicability, though, it says at the top of this, applicability, regular session of the board, but then purpose says committee of the whole. So there's a conflict there, whether it's the applicability as committee or board or both. I would suggest, much like Director Morrison, that this should be made available at all occasions. The reason that I say that is that, like us, community members, obviously I've spoken my mind on public input in the past, and I do want to thank those who gave email input in advance, because to me that gives a lot more value from an input perspective, to be able to take the time to consider it, even though I didn't have a lot of time to consider that input before today's meeting. I do appreciate being able to have it written down and refer back to it. But now that the horses are out of the barn, so to speak, in regards to public input, I think it's something that we live with. And Director Morrison kind of spoke to some of the challenges when the exceptions occur, but those aren't the rules, so to speak, right? So adjusting policy for the odd exception, we should have mitigative procedures in place to manage those exceptions, but I think that remaining committee of the whole board and ESC public input is important. And the reason I say that is that you make a decision at committee of the whole, both board members and community members get a chance to sort of think through those decisions that were made and then come give public input, perhaps ask a question at the end of the committee of the whole meeting, and come next week or at the next board meeting and give input based on their questions and considerations that the board has also had the opportunity. In the policy, though, I would specifically speak to items, the last one under 5L. The matter they spoke about during public input in the last 3 months. I don't know who's going to track that, but I think we could just safely do away with that piece. And I do support the limitations on some of the items with which public input is appropriate, specifically those where there's a statutory process and an appropriate opportunity to give input, and land use decisions are one of those, prior to, of course, after third reading. But the reason being is that you shouldn't be holding pseudo-public hearings via public input, and that only gives land use decisions an opportunity to be challenged. So I would suggest that the guardrails around land use decisions and public input are important, if only to validate the input and to not corrupt the decision-making process when you're giving other avenues outside of the statutory public hearing for people to continue to give input that would unfairly perhaps marginalize the opportunity for an applicant to have fair and due process. There are legislative requirements laid out in the Local Government Act that indicate how land use matters should proceed. And, I think we need to ensure that those opportunities are given for input, but not corrupt the public hearing process by holding a number of pseudo-public hearings through public input or question period. That being said, the only thing I can see in here that I would have issue with is, I think it's 5L, the last item there, and that the policy should apply to committee of the whole, ESC, and board meetings. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of what Director Stone has said, and I'm not sure you articulated it the same way, but often the last minute public input, it can be infactual, and then there's no way to verify that. So, it's problematic at times, and it's not as a valuable input, but it is important. Although I would like to say that the previous board, or the one before that, had introduced public input to replace question period because question period was not, it was too late. So, but now our question period has turned into a speechify, a lecture. I actually have never had question period feel valuable. It's always become something that it's not. And it's just not, to me, I would like to see question period be removed, but I know that a lot of directors probably would not support that because it really doesn't help in our decision making. And looking at public engagement guidelines, there's suggestions that it should be in a variety of locations and to go where people are having conversations. So I think this is part of a greater issue, is that we need to be engaging the public where they are, and that being online, social media. And we're not exactly doing a very good job at that. And we don't take public input that way. So, and another thing, it does say that we try new methods and tools to determine if they're the right fit for the context. And I would say that question period is not the right fit. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Istash, furiously writing notes.
Just didn't want to lose my train of thought. I appreciate the comments that Director Stone made because they're close to what I was thinking. Just to quickly, just for on the topic, I agree with everybody on that we can leave question period and public input in both, but I do appreciate the updates sharing that we need to make sure both are in policy, that they are only on agenda items. And thank you, Director Atkin, for reaffirming that. Hope our chairs feel confident enough to cut people off immediately if they are speeches or statements. I've seen we've set good precedents in that, so we need to continue to show that, to educate the public that that's not the opportunity to do that. If they want statements or speeches, use the emails for that, but not public input, period. And then the only other question in reading them, that's number 2 in the public input, it was raised in the email, was the extending of the public input by 2/3 vote was changed to unanimous. So was the question on that. So in the updates shown on the staff report, lines 1 and 2 for public input, I'm good with. And then on question period, it was just reaffirming limitations of questions. So it looks like the general consensus of discussion here is just, do we make sure that we keep all question periods and public input periods across all board meetings?
Thank you. I have Director Deck, Martman, and then Wilson. Go ahead, Director Deck.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the policies, the number 1 policy is regarding behavior of the public and directors and staff. And I'm not so concerned about directors and staff, but I am concerned about the behavior of some of the public. I think it can be intimidating and frightening and potentially dangerous. So my problem, though, is that if you have a zero tolerance policy and people don't follow it, that's almost as if you don't have a policy at all. So I'm wondering how one could possibly enforce a policy like this. So that's one concern of mine. What would be the outcome? And then the second one, number 2. Oh, sorry. Number 2, I don't agree with the unanimous vote. I think it should be a majority vote, just like every other decision we make. And I can carry on with other questions after some other people have spoken. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring up, like, on the idea of enforcement, the respectful spaces bylaw that will be coming forward relatively soon, to try to create a safe space where the public can engage with us and we still feel safe within that, not intimidated and frightened, because that's real. Yeah. Patrick, was there anything you wanted to elaborate on that Director Deck brought up?
I think that just in terms of a highlight in both of them, that the rewording with regards to the environment that you want to set, there's some change in wording. I didn't specifically put in wording that you see on the agenda that we read out, so that we could have a bit more of discussion. I know that, Chair, that you've provided a very good thought on the matter in terms of updating what we say on the agenda. What's published in the agenda that sort of reflects in each of the policy really the number one points. And I'm happy to share that with you if that's the appropriate time. And that speaks to the environment that you wish to set and the tone you wish to set for the public.
Yeah, go ahead, read it out.
And you'll remember I said one out at the beginning of the meeting as well. And this can be the same for question period. The public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item or board or the like, if you so desire. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment any item on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that have or been subject to a public hearing. The only caveat is if there are other items that are mentioned in the policies around other development, and mostly about development processes. Input from the community is valued and appreciated. We request that the input is presented in a friendly and respectful manner. Your cooperation in maintaining safe, respectful, and orderly environment is greatly appreciated. And so I think that the last three sentences of that statement is something that we would probably like to be able to articulate at each meeting and read that out.
Yeah, and we've discussed that little preamble is up, we can easily edit it, correct?
Yeah, there's nothing that is prescribed in the policy, and even if it was prescribed, it is subject to how you want to manage that. And so if in changing environments, changing circumstances, that preamble can be altered and amended at your pleasure.
Sure. It was just on that particular item. Well, I'm going to suggest that I think the chair should read out that preamble. It's the chair's meeting, the chair's in charge, the chair has to enforce it. I think it should be the chair reading the preamble and not staff.
Oh, good point, fair point. Okay, I've got Director Martman, Wilson, Istash, and Morrison. Do you still want to be on the end? No, okay. Go ahead, Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. That's good information, Mr. Robbins. I appreciate that, and Director Morrison has a good point as well. And I think everybody has good points. So how can I add to this conversation in a meaningful way? And I think the first thing is to explain my view of why I think this is important for all committees and all meetings. And the reason is that I see, I'll make a farming analogy. When you have a tractor and you have a bucket on the front of your tractor, you want to change that implement sometimes to have a more functional implement. So you have something called a bale squeeze. But to put a bale squeeze on, you have to have the tractor be able to lift it, tilt it, but you have to have a third function, that's called the squeeze. So if you think about the first function of a tractor, you want to lift the bucket. Well, that's me getting information from our staff, and you get these great reports, and you hear and you learn from that. The second function is actually to tilt it, and that's what I refer to as the members around the board here that inform me and help me learn. But it's the third function that makes it really valuable, and that's the squeeze function, and that's what I see as public input. That's the time that we can hear. And sometimes it does feel like you're getting squeezed. But I think the idea is that to really to have valuable decisions or good decision-making, you need to respect and hear all three of those pieces. So that's why I'm in favor of public input. I wouldn't change it at all. I do understand that we have to balance and have guardrails, and I think we can put those things in place. But I also want to speak from the perspective of not it being a director, but being a public member. Because I know from my community, just getting up and speaking is nerve-wracking. And getting up and speaking doesn't have a barrier with public input. Emails are barriers, social media is a barrier, but they can come in and sit here and feel that if they have something to say, they need to stand up, get over their nervousness, and speak at the mic. And that, to me, is, if I was a member of the public, one day I will be the member of the public, I want to be able to stand up like we have and be able to provide that input. So the less barriers we can put in place, to me, the strength. The last thing I would speak to is around what we will permit to be spoken to. I like what we have right now. If we need to add to it because of statutory requirements, then put those in place as well around land use. But if we don't have a statutory requirement for it, to me, it should be fair game. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you to Patrick for this other wording, which I assume that you provided, because I was going to speak on that particular item because I wasn't happy with the previous wording at all. It was almost to the point of admonishment. You're saying, "You naughty boys, behave yourselves," the lot of you, before you speak. So I'm glad that that now has been amended. I'll support that anytime, which is great. I think the other point that was brought up was the change from majority to unanimous to extend. I am not in favour of the unanimous. I would much rather see the majority vote come through as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Istash.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on following up on Director Deck's comment, and then Patrick, with he following up, saying that, as a reminder, we are working on the Respectful Spaces bylaw, correct? So then with that, do we need a placeholder? Because I think we should be referring to the policy. Do you intend, if this gets adopted and moved here, we'd come back later for a future amendment? Or do we put a placeholder knowing that that policy be referred in items 1 under both question period and public input policies? So do we need to put a placeholder in the wording there right now so that in the future we don't technically need to amend it? I think we should be referring to the Respectful Spaces bylaw because we do as such in North Cowichan. And as I shared before, our mayor there has had to use and refer to our, we call it safe spaces, because that's what protects, in a large part, of course, it protects directors and those at the board table and staff, but mostly it's about how the public treats us and how we can deal with the public. I know Ms. Director Wilson just said we don't want to scold them, but we're getting to a point where people are really getting over the edge of areas of concern rather than just providing input. So, long-winded, do we need a placeholder in both of these policies for the upcoming policy to be included in this? Thank you.
Looks like we have Ms. Miles Wilson to answer that.
Hi. So our community services department has been doing some research and is putting together some wording that can form a bylaw or a policy. You will be seeing a report later in the month to that effect to outline and ask and provide a recommendation. And so we believe as staff that we're at the point where we need a little bit more teeth to that, the conduct that would be in a Respectful Spaces bylaw, considering all the things that we've been grappling with over the last number of years. But you will receive a report that kind of outlines, and gets some further direction. So we can put a placeholder in there. Just wanted to acknowledge, yes, staff are doing the work, and you will receive more information in several weeks.
Thank you. Alternate Director Lochner.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just first like to begin by recognizing my relative inexperience in comparison to all of you brilliant people in the room, and thank you for your time here today. I'd like to offer just a little bit of an outside perspective, being that this is my first meeting with the CVRD, and first say that I fully support full accessibility in terms of how the current policies are reflective of inviting public participation and question periods across both committee and board meetings. I'm also curious, seeing that the current policies that are in place were pre-pandemic, and cautious perhaps about reactionary policy review processes, being that many directors have reflected that perhaps the higher tension public participation periods are few and far between, and sometimes wanting to restrict or limit public engagement can sometimes fuel those fires more. And so I also just didn't want to be the only director who didn't speak at this meeting. So wanted to offer that outside perspective and say I am absolutely in support of the policies remaining the way they are, with the changes that we've discussed regarding the respectful spaces conduct as well, and am also not in support of the unanimous vote being required. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And you're very well spoken, and you are an equal member at this table. Okay, I have Director Douglas and McGonigal. Anybody else? I think that's, oh, Stone. Oh yeah, Director Stone, your hand is almost transparent. Could you choose like a blue color or something?
I
Okay.
am almost transparent until I get my first pinking of the season.
Director Douglas, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, a question for you and the electoral area directors. With the proposed public input policy under section 5A, it references excluding for public input items related to an official community plan, bylaw, zoning bylaw, and various other land use bylaws and permits. I'm wondering if any of the directors or perhaps staff have compared that to the recent provincial changes with regards to residential housing development under Bill 44, because under Bill 44, we are now prohibited from holding public hearings for rezoning applications that are consistent with a official community plan. My concern, and obviously this is for the electoral area directors to sort out, but my concern would be that if you're not able to, if there isn't going to be a public hearing and you're not able to comment on an application at the committee of the whole, I would assume that Electoral Area Services Committee would still provide that avenue, but perhaps something by yourself, Chair or staff, one of the directors would like to comment on.
I agree with your concern, Director Douglas. Mr. Robbins, do you have anything to say about that?
Other than, I'm not sure which director pointed out that if there's no statutory requirement, that it should be fair game. And so really the one that has the specific statutory, and we've seen, or I've looked at in other policies, is around public hearings. The other, the reason why that was expanded in this draft was to reflect the challenges that you have and the risks that you talked about earlier, that conversations stray, and it becomes a quasi-public hearing without the ability, especially when it comes to applications, for proponents to be able to have the time to provide you the same kind of input or provide different input that you're receiving at the same meeting. And so while not statutorily required, we added those to simply to mitigate the risks associated with a slippery slope of becoming a quasi-public hearing. But you're correct. That is, the only real is with regards to a public hearing. And when it comes to official community plan, although you may not be providing public hearings on that, there will still be other business when it comes to zoning and official community plan amendments, regardless of what happens on a specific piece of property. And so policy work will still have all of that, the processes in public hearings, irrespective of the legislation talking about limiting public hearings if a property is rezoned and is consistent with the OCP.
Thank you. Director McGonigal and then Stone, hopefully to close.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with keeping the question period and public input in all aspects of the business that we conduct here. We were placed here by those who chose to vote us in, and it should not be an autocratic representation of that. I think we need to have a different perspective on making decisions from the input of the public and those who have put us in the place. The limitation of unanimous consent on extending, I do not agree with as well. So although I will not agree with the previous 15 speakers, I will agree with some of the comments that have been made, that we do have to provide a safe space or a respectful place, not just for us, not just for our staff, but for those who continue to join us in public representation, who may be intimidated by a certain faction within that sense. So I would be in favor of continuing within the operation, referring to what Director Stone had previously mentioned in 5L, and the rewording of the opening remarks. Thank you. Oh, and if I could, alternate Director Lochner eloquently said.
So we just had 2 more hands pop up, but I am really hearing a consensus in the group. Director Abbott and Deck, do you need to be added? Do you have new information? Okay, so I'm going to Director Stone first.
Sorry, I was prepared to make a motion. I was just feverishly trying to type it out so I could email it to Mr. Robbins, but if we have other speakers that will then change that motion further, perhaps it's premature. But I would say the motion would include applicability and purpose to include BOR Committee, the whole and electoral area services committee meetings, removal of L and the edit of the extension of the period for the additional 15 minutes to either be bare majority or 2/3 vote. So maybe after the speakers, I can have this typed out and emailed to Mr. Robbins and the chair.
Thank you for moving us along. Director Abbott.
For brevity, Chair, thank you. I wanted to say that I'm shamed by Director Lochner's words. Being mum on this topic, I don't wish to be mum any further. And like the others, I think we need to have question period unaltered and input unaltered. I think this morning was indicative of what we get when the public bring forth through emails and their eloquent presentations. I want to see every avenue for that. At present, it doesn't seem to be overtasked, and well-chaired meetings will shut down inappropriate comments. That's my contribution this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I do want to say that I have great respect for the active listeners in our group that may share the same ideas as somebody that else has spoken, and they don't have to add. So we don't always have to have 16 of us say the same thing. Director Deck, to close.
I'm speaking to number 6 now. The speaker's comments are live streamed, and the people who come to the podium know that. But I'm concerned that the last sentence might be chilling to some of the people who come to the podium, where personal information may include a member of the public's name, address, and personal opinions. Now, that's obviously the case, but I'm concerned about the address. When people come to the podium and say their area or where they live, I think that probably should be enough. And I speak to that only because of the rising concern about people's privacy. So I would just say the area is sufficient and that they don't have to say their address would be nice.
Thank
Would
you.
be safer.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Robbins, you had something to say about that?
No, I'm just going to suggest, number 6 was really the qualifier for freedom of information and protection of privacy. So somebody may provide you with that. And so if somebody offers that up we're not requesting it, but if they offer it up, that could be recorded. And so this is our heads up to those that want to participate, that their personal information may become part of a record. And then that may give them thought as to, as you point out, they may just want to give, I'm in area A or B or the like, as opposed to their specific address.
All right. Thank you for all of your input. I hear a strong consensus to keep public input, and I really look forward to the conversation around delegations when that comes up, because this balance of finding really high quality input from the public that we so value and that is so important to for us to make fully informed decisions, but also to not be swayed by misinformation. It's a difficult thing to balance, and I think the more that we can encourage that high quality input rather than removing opportunities, the better. So I think, the public engagement strategy that will be coming, will be great for that, and to make it more obvious on the website. How can somebody provide input for a specific agenda? How can we actually find the agendas? I think just clarity for the public on how they can provide input is so important. So, Mr. Robbins, are we clear on a... Director Morrison.
Sorry, and it's new, Chair. We have, I think, a developing issue, and it's on those days when there's a whole bunch of people show up to provide us input. It's the ability to have individuals who may not want to provide input on an item that the group that's shown up wants to provide input, and I've seen it play out a couple of times where we've created a list for people to provide input, and all of the folks on the list are on one topic, and we haven't provided that opportunity for perhaps regular members that come here to provide us input. So I just want to raise this as an issue. It says that the corporate officer may entertain a list, and I think that we have to turn our minds to the corporate officer may create a list, but how we can have diversity in the input that's provided to us, so that it's not all, let's face it, once you've heard the first couple or three speakers 4 through 7 are saying essentially the same thing, it would be a desirable thing for us to be able to hear input on other items as well. So I'm not saying we have to do anything with this today, but we should turn our minds to addressing that.
Okay, I think Mr. Robbins has an idea and a motion.
I
That's
think
Aaron
that
submitted.
I think that's a great role for the chair, especially when you're listening, and if it's an unbalanced conversation, despite the list, we'd like to hear somebody perhaps in an opposing view, and I think that either embedded in the position descriptions or just by convention or just practice, that could be introduced, and something the chair might do. And Director Stone did provide us with a proposed motion, and I think that you might want to read it first and then speak to it.
May I?
Director Stone, you're gonna read the motion?
If the chair would grant me the opportunity.
Please do.
That the updated public input period policy be adopted with the following changes being included: applicability to include board and committee meetings, purpose to include board and committee meetings, removal of 5L, and change of number 2 to extend public input on a 2/3 majority vote. And if I get a seconder, I would speak to it.
That has been seconded. Go ahead, Director Stone.
So, notwithstanding that I'm not sure I understood the answer to Director Douglas's, Mayor Douglas, Director Douglas's question about 5A, and maybe we can get some clarity on that. I'm not sure with some of the changes that necessarily needs to impact this policy, but that being said, I think these are all sensible. I do understand that maybe directors might say, oh, it should just be a bare majority vote to extend public input, but in practice, I don't think I've seen anyone maybe once vote against extending, one person one time vote against extending public input, and I won't name names. But that being said, We generally try and welcome the public, and I know there might be a perception that when you're putting up guardrails, it really is to provide focus to public input. And I do think to Director Morrison's comment, it's really our responsibility as chairs to say, I hear that we're hearing about this specific item. Could folks who want to speak to other items on the agenda please let us know, and we can make accommodations for that. So I don't think it's necessary in the policy, but hopefully folks can support this, or happy to hear your amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. So moved and seconded, and Director Istash just emailed an amendment to add the placeholder in both question period and public input for the respectful spaces policy reference. Is that needed in the motion, sure. Mr. Robbins? Yeah. Is there a seconder? Seconded. On the amendment, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So now back to, back to the main motion as amended. Director Martman.
So I'd be looking to make an amendment for 5A that would basically refer to the wording as we have it now. That only statutory requirements for land use be excluded from public input, period.
So that's moved. Seconder? Seconded. Are we clear on the amendment? Do we need? I see Director Morrison really thinking hard. So basically the line that says, yeah, I don't. Mr. Robbins, can you help us out here?
I'm just looking
at the,
I could read the current wording if
if you could read the current wording, that would be great.
The current wording is excluding matters which are or have been the subject of a public hearing.
Yes, good. So moved, seconded. I see Director Stone online speaking to the amendment.
Yeah, can I hear the amendment again, please? Because I'm not clear on what that would actually mean.
I can read it in what it is currently. If you like.
The amendment, not what's there currently. I can see that.
The amendment is to what is currently, which is current, not the one that's being proposed. So the current one says, a speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes, excluding matters which are or have been the subject of a public hearing. That's the wording we have currently.
And you want to remain with that wording?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would speak against the amendment. I think this is a more prescriptive and clear definition of what would not be appropriate, and protects not just against what's statutorily available to folks, but I fear that we create opportunity to essentially derail processes that are outlined in the proposed 5A by allowing public input on them when there are ample opportunities for input that wouldn't perhaps open doors to challenge decisions made by a committee or board going forward. And I think that this does a better job at that than the present policy. Thanks.
Any other speakers on this amendment? Look into the EA directors. Oh, Director Douglas? Okay, go ahead.
So, Chair, I'm reluctant to weigh on this one, as I know it's more the purview of the electoral area directors. I guess I would be speaking in favor of what Director Martman has suggested. And my concern, just to reiterate my earlier point, is that the proposed wording, so if we exclude public input on a zoning bylaw, under Bill 44, if a zoning bylaw is consistent with the OCP, you don't need a public hearing. So if we're excluding any comment on that at not only board, but all committee levels, and perhaps I'm missing something here, but as I see that, that would take away any opportunity for the public to comment on such a zoning bylaw amendment at a public meeting. I guess they would still have the opportunity to send emails into the board and the committees, but as far as I can tell, that would cut off all those avenues.
We have Ms. Cherolf to give us some clarity.
Thank you, Chair. So if a public hearing is prohibited from being held, or if the board decides to not hold a public hearing because the zoning bylaw is consistent with the OCP, there is a requirement for notice to be published and the notice to be sent also to the affected property owners. And the affected property owners also have an opportunity to provide comments in writing, which are received by staff and collated and provided back to the committee, usually attached to or summarized as part of a staff report. So there is an avenue for public input through the notice process, which is outlined in the development application procedures bylaw. So I just wanted to ensure that the committee is aware that if for whatever reason public input period does not permit discussion or presentation of comments regarding matters which are the subject of a public hearing or a public hearing that's been prohibited or waived, there is still another avenue for comments to be received by the committee and board.
So, Ms. Charles, can we have a follow-up question for you? So just to clarify, Mr. Robbins just brought up, if we are not allowed to have a public hearing, and then essentially a public hearing kind of happens in public input, procedurally, is that a problem?
Well, that's a legal question, Chair, but I would suspect it would be. Yeah.
Thank you. Muddy waters. Director Stone, go ahead.
Sorry, and that speaks to my point. By providing a workaround to the legislation that says public hearings would not be permitted, and then providing the opportunity to essentially have a pseudo-public hearing via public input would just, to me, be looking for a way to circumvent the legislation. So I wouldn't be supportive of that amendment. Thank you.
Director Martman.
You know, I think we've had this policy in place for a number of years, and the 4 years I've been here, I've seen one issue where there was some risk involved with it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't risk involved. What I do think is the wording for this 5A needs to be in a way, and maybe this isn't the right amendment, but it needs to be in a way that is enabling rather than restricting. And I don't know if there's some work that could be done on this 5A that will do that, because I just feel that there's enough barriers in place already. And to find a way, when a person a member of the public wants to have a voice on a topic, to be told, no, you can't do that because of X, Y, and Z, that's not actually a statutory requirement. I feel like we're putting administrative barriers in their way, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. So I still think that we've had it and it's been working for the most part. I would stay with it, but I would defer to very experienced people.
Anyone else to speak to this amendment? Does this need more research? Go ahead, Director Morrison.
Yeah, this is bothersome for me because we are inviting people to come and speak, and then we don't have a public hearing, but you can't speak, or you can speak. I think that I'm already going to thoughts like, if there's going to be a land use decision that can't have a public hearing, that we ensure that we've invited all of the applicants to attend so that we can be protected on that side. It's all very complex, and experience in this seat is saying that this is a administrative way of CYA, or protecting ourselves, when, on the one hand, we're asking for people to provide input. I would suggest that, if people have a concern, they need a place to express it, and sometimes an email isn't satisfactory to the people that want to come and provide us input. So I'm really reluctant, but think we might need to refer this one item for further investigation. And I would move that.
So, yeah, how does that work? We have a motion and the whole thing gets referred?
Yeah.
I was just going to move that we refer 5A.
Yeah.
Chair, technically, conceivably, you can adopt with the exception of 5A and refer that back to staff for some more reworking, more research.
Okay.
But you could still adopt the rest of it.
Okay, so referral motion of
On
5A back to staff for more research. Is there a seconder? Discussion on the referral motion. Director Martman?
I'm not sure if it's just, you can rule me out of order, but I'm wondering if there's a role for the delegation into the 5A discussion at some point.
Hate to call a point of order, Madam Chair, but discussion on a referral is only on the propriety of referral, but I think Director Martman's question is valid after we deal with the referral motion.
Thank you for that guidance, Director Stone. Any other discussion on the referral motion, the propriety of referral? Then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? 1, Director Stone, Director McGonigal, Director Acton, opposed. Motion carries. So that's referred back to staff. Back to the motion on the table, right?
The amendment
As
is on the
amended.
table, Madam Chair. No. Director, that 5A has been referred. My apologies.
Yeah. As amended and with the referral. So do we need that read out again? Maybe just for clarity, or?
That the updated public input period policy be adopted with the following changes being included. Applicability to include board and committee meetings, purpose to include board and committee meetings, removal of 5L in the public input period, and change of 2 to extend public input on a majority to 2/3, on a 2/3 majority vote in the public input period, with an addition of a placeholder in both question period and public input period to accommodate work on respectful spaces policy and/or bylaw. With, in addition, 5A, which reads an official community plan, bylaw, zoning bylaw, land use contract bylaw, development permit, a development variance permit, a heritage alteration permit, or temporary use permit unless the meeting at which the delegation appears is also the public hearing for the bylaw or permit in relation to which the delegation makes submissions.
Thank you. Any more discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. So we're 5 to 12. We still have an R2, but I'm reluctant to get into a big, deep conversation. I would like to see at our next meeting, maybe more in-depth report, including potential job descriptions for chair, vice chair, EAS, COTW. Director McGonigal?
I would move R2 to a future governance meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded. Anyone, any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Aaron, sorry, Director Stone, you still have your hand up.
Point of order, we haven't dealt with R1, 3, or 4 though, however, have we?
I thought we just did.
We dealt with public input period, but are we making those changes to question period as well?
Chair, maybe I incorrectly assumed the discussion was on both policies and the overlap of the discussion. And in essence, the only changes to question period is with respect to the applicability across both board and committees. And that would be the substantive change in question period policy, as discussed so far.
Follow up if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
So I'm happy to agree with that as long as we incorporate the amendment that Director Istash had put forward as well, like those other items. And of course, I think with the referral of 5A, both policies should come back, obviously, to the board with that information for final adoption. Thanks.
So do we need another motion for that?
No, and that's why when I read it back, I mentioned both.
Both policies.
Public input period and question period.
Great, and then number 4, does that,
The
changes to the bylaw?
The changes to the bylaw, I'd suggest you entertain that motion. Should we need to, I just need to review the procedure bylaw to see if it's still, these policies are in line or vice versa. And we may or may not need to bring back changes to your bylaw. So the motion for consideration
As written?
as written. Staff bring forward changes to the CVRD bylaw number 2889, Regional Board Procedures bylaw 2006 for consideration to align and reflect changes to public input and question period policies.
Great, yeah. So this is just if there are any changes needed to the bylaw, you'll bring that back at a future meeting. Do I have a mover? Seconder? Yeah. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And one last thing for clarity for staff, Chair, is with respect to working on 5A, whether it is the pleasure to have it come back to committee or to go with suggested changes with recommendations for the board's consideration. We're happy to do either.
I think it needs to come back to committee, or go ahead, Director Morrison.
Well, I think it's really something that is, and I think Director Douglas had noted, it's particular to electoral area services. And I'm wondering if we might want to test drive it through EASC and go through to the board in advance of any changes that might happen. Okay.
Is that a motion?
Sure. Do you need it in writing, or can you capture it? So I would move that the 5A be referred through to staff, then EASC for recommendation to the board.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion on that motion? No. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And I do want to thank those Muni directors that were supportive towards our EA policies. Okay, Mr. Robbins, where are we?
R2, you referred to your next. We go to question period. Questions shall be addressed to the chair and must be truly questions and not statements of opinions. Questioners are not prevented to make a speech. No one online?
Can I read a little alternate preamble?
Of course, I should have suggested that. My apologies.
We welcome anyone that has a question to approach the podium, and I want to say that your input is valued and appreciated, and that we request your input to be presented in a friendly, respectful manner. Your cooperation in maintaining a safe, respectful, and orderly environment for all of us is greatly appreciated.
Well stated, Chair, thank you. And I do appreciate that the question period and public input were carried forward. I would like to ask a question on the 5A. I think in the preamble of that, it says it presumes committee of the whole only, so that will be changed. And I look forward to having input on that. I did want to clarify the number 6, the name requirement. I believe, is in my memory, and I've been coming here since 2014, that it was a requirement for people to state their name when addressing the board. And I would like to see that continue. And really, and where they're from, because it can have a direct relationship if it's matters that pertain to only the electoral area business. So I would like that, but not specific mailing addresses. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins, did you want to add something?
Well, I didn't know if it was appropriate when you answer questions, but I could give you the simple answers because it's actually already embedded in the policy that you want to go forward.
Please do.
So under 4, it says a speaker shall be recognized by the chair and prior to speaking provide their name and residency. And again, 6 was only a disclaimer, not a disclaimer, but I'm lost for word, but it's with respect to our notice for freedom of information and protection of privacy. So people aren't asked to be providing their address. They are just given notice that if they do provide the address, which is personal information, and we try to protect that, or we protect that information, that it may become part of the record. And so when somebody's asking a question, they're recognized by the chair, they state their name and their residency, area A, area B, Saltaire, or however they want to characterize it. If somebody chooses to give their address, which they can, then they are given this notice that could become part of the record.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Director Abbott?
I appreciate
Point
the
of order,
question.
Madam Chair.
I appreciate
so-
This
sorry,
is
Director Abbott,
question
this is
period to
question
the
period.
chair,
Yeah,
and there's really good reasons why we don't engage directors during
yeah.
Okay.
question period.
We can take it offline. Okay. No one else in the gallery? Mr. Robbins, do we call for adjournment? Is that our next?
You bet.
Seconded? All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. Great meeting. It was a slog, but